She's not a real doctor. She pretends to have credentials she bought at a second-rate school. My mother-in-law said that to a room of 60 people on Thanksgiving. She said it with her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She said it the way she used to deliver lectures on Chaucer, like the verdict had been rendered and the rest of us were just catching up. 40 seconds later, the man at the next table stopped breathing. My name is Sybil Trent. I'm 43 years old. I'm a board-certified emergency physician at a Level 1 trauma center, and I've been saving lives since I was 22. But on Thanksgiving Day, in the Fellowship Hall of Grace Lutheran Church, I was on my knees on a linoleum floor performing CPR on a 68-year-old man named Gregory Hayes, while the woman who just told the room I was a fraud watched from 6 feet away with a dinner roll still in her hand. I need to tell you how we got here, and I need you to understand something about the woman Camille Trent decided I was, versus the one who actually showed up. I enlisted in the Navy at 19. By 22, I was a trauma nurse aboard the USNS Comfort in the Persian Gulf. If you've never seen a hospital ship, picture a floating medical center the length of 3 football fields, painted white with red crosses on the hull, and every bed inside filled with someone who didn't expect to be there that morning. My second deployment, a port explosion, sent us 41 casualties in 6 hours. 41. I can still smell it. The copper and iodine fog that settles in a triage bay when the blood doesn't stop coming. The snap of latex gloves pulled on so fast the powder puffs into the air. Sailing bags spiked and hung from IV poles that swayed with every roll of the ship. And the sound, not screaming, not at that volume. The sound of 41 people trying to breathe through damage their bodies weren't designed to survive. We ran out of gurneys by patient 19. I remember that number because I stopped counting after it. Somewhere around hour 4, a 19-year-old merchant sailor came in with a tension pneumothorax. His left lung had collapsed. His trachea was deviating. He was minutes from cardiac arrest, and the ship was pitching so badly that every surface was a moving target. The surgeon was elbow deep in another patient 3 bays over. So I did what I was trained to do. I braced my right hip against the gurney rail to keep us both stable, clamped my hand on his chest, and performed an emergency thoracotomy while the deck rolled under my feet. I saved his life. I also crushed the cartilage in my right hip. That was 21 years ago. I still walk with a hitch. It's faint. Most people don't notice unless they know what to listen for. My nursing staff at the hospital has learned to read it like a clock. When the hitch gets more pronounced, they know my shift has gone too long. When it disappears entirely, they know the adrenaline has kicked in and something very bad is happening to a patient. I spent a long time not talking about what happened next. I'm talking about it now because I think the ending matters, and because the ending is not what Camille expected. After 8 years in the Navy, I used my GI Bill. 4 years of medical school, 3 years of emergency medicine residency. I earned my board certification the same way every other emergency physician earns it, by walking through the door of a Level 1 trauma center on the worst night of someone's life and making sure they walked out of it. I've intubated patients in hallways. I've cracked chests in parking lots. I've called time of death on a 16-year-old and then turned around and delivered a baby 40 minutes later in the same ER. That's what emergency medicine is. You don't get to choose which version of the job shows up on any given shift. But to Camille Trent, I was a nurse who went back to school. That's the phrase she used. Not once. For 9 years. She never said it to my face at first. She's too precise for that. Too practiced. Camille was a tenured professor of comparative literature at the State University for 29 years. She retired with an endowed lecture series in her name. She speaks in perfectly enunciated paragraphs, the kind that have a thesis statement and a conclusion, and God help you if you interrupt before she reaches the period. The first time I met her, she adjusted her reading glasses, looked me up and down, and said, Thomas tells me you were in the military. Not a question, a classification. She'd already sorted me into a drawer and closed it. Thomas is my husband. He's a good man, a kind man, and he is absolutely terrified of his mother. I understood that fear. Camille doesn't yell. She doesn't need to. She treats every room like a lecture hall. She is the speaker. Everyone else is the audience, and disagreement is simply a failure of comprehension on your part. She waves her hand when she dismisses something, a slow sweep of her fingers, like she's clearing cigarette smoke that offends her. I've watched her do it to waiters, to Thomas's friends, to the pastor's wife, and I've watched her do it to me. For the first few years, it was small. She'd introduce me at functions as Thomas's wife. She was a nurse, not a doctor. A nurse. When I corrected her gently, the glasses came down. Well, Sybil, I'm sure your program was very thorough. She said thorough, the way you'd say adequate. Then it got worse. 3 years ago, I came home from a 12-hour shift, a shift where I'd managed a multi-car pileup that brought in 9 patients in 40 minutes, and found Thomas sitting at the kitchen table looking like someone had drained the blood from his face. "Mom boxed up your diplomas," he said. She'd been at our house that afternoon while I was at work. She'd gone into my home office. She'd taken my medical school diploma, my board certification, and my Navy Commendation Medal off the wall, wrapped them in newspaper, and put them in a cardboard box in the garage. She replaced them with framed botanical prints. She said they were cluttering the room, Thomas said. He hadn't stopped her. I went to the garage. I found the box. The glass on my board certification was cracked where she'd stacked it face down under the metal frame. I stood there for a long time, pressing my thumb into my right hip where the cartilage is gone, feeling the ache radiate down my leg. It was cold in the garage. The cold always makes it worse. I didn't yell. I didn't call Camille. I carried the box back inside, rehung every frame, and told Thomas that if his mother touched my office again, I would change the locks and she would not receive a key. He nodded. He didn't argue. He also didn't call his mother. That was a night I realized something about Thomas that I'd been avoiding for years. He loved me. I believe that completely. But love without courage is just affection. And affection doesn't stop someone from erasing you. I should have said more. I should have sat him down and made him understand what those frames meant. Not as decorations, but as proof of every night I spent studying pharmacology with a hip that throbbed so badly I had to stand at my desk, every clinical rotation where an attending called me the nurse. And I corrected him the same way I corrected Camille, every board exam I passed while our oldest had the flu and I hadn't slept in 31 hours. But I didn't. I hung the frames and went to bed, because I am better at fixing other people's crises than my own. That's the truth. And it cost me. It cost me because Camille didn't stop. She escalated. She told my children, my daughter, who was 9, and my son, who was 7, that Mommy's degree isn't real. My daughter came home from Camille's house and asked me why I lied about being a doctor. I was standing at the kitchen counter. I had just finished a 30-hour shift where I'd lost a patient, a 44-year-old father of 3, aortic dissection, dead before we could get him to the OR. I was still wearing my hospital ID. The attending physician lanyard was still around my neck. I knelt down. My hip screamed. I looked my daughter in the eye and said, "My degree is real. My job is real. And I will always tell you the truth." She believed me. She's 12 now, and she still does. But Camille wasn't finished. 6 months ago, she wrote a letter. A formal letter, typed, printed on linen stationery, hand-delivered, to the credentialing committee at my hospital. She questioned my medical qualifications. She cited my nursing background as evidence that I was practicing beyond my scope. She suggested that the hospital was exposing itself to liability by employing a physician whose credentials were obtained through an accelerated military pipeline rather than a legitimate medical education. The credentialing committee forwarded it to the chief medical officer. The chief medical officer forwarded it to me. I read it in my office between patients. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I folded the letter, put it in my desk drawer, and went back to the trauma bay. But that night, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 14 minutes before I could drive home. I pressed my thumb into my hip until the pain in the joint was louder than the pain in my chest. I stared at the steering wheel and breathed. She hadn't just dismissed me. She hadn't just insulted me. She had tried to take my career. She had put her name on a document designed to make a hospital question whether I should be allowed to practice medicine. Medicine I have practiced for 9 years, in theaters of war and trauma bays and parking lots and hallways, and once on the floor of a gas station bathroom when a teenager was seizing and nobody else knew what to do. And Thomas, my husband, the man who loves me, knew about the letter. Camille had told him she was sending it. He asked her not to. She sent it anyway. And he didn't warn me. He didn't call the hospital. He didn't call his mother and tell her that what she was doing wasn't just cruel. It was dangerous. He kept the peace. The Thanksgiving community dinner at Grace Lutheran was Camille's stage. She'd organized it for 15 years. Head table, place cards, a microphone for the blessing, which she delivered herself every year because the pastor had learned it was easier to let her have it than to fight for it. Thomas asked me not to come this year. He said it carefully, the way you'd suggest someone skip a party because of weather, not because his mother had tried to end her medical career 6 months earlier. It might be easier, he said. Easier for whom, I did not ask. Because I already knew the answer. I went anyway. I wore a gray cardigan and flat shoes that accommodate the hitch in my step. I carried Robert's pocket Bible in my left coat pocket. Robert, my father-in-law, who died of pancreatic cancer 14 months ago, and who was the only person in that family who ever looked at me and saw exactly what was there. He left me the Bible with a note in the front cover. You fix bodies. God fixes the rest. Between the two of you, we'll be fine. I pressed my thumb into my hip as I crossed the parking lot. The November air was sharp, and the ache had already started radiating down my leg. The fellowship hall smelled like roasted turkey and instant coffee and the particular lemon polish they use on church pews that gets into everything. Camille saw me from across the room. She adjusted her reading glasses. She did not smile. I sat at a table near the back. Thomas brought me a plate I didn't touch. The mashed potatoes cooled into a skin. The cranberry sauce caught the overhead fluorescent light and looked like something I'd seen in a trauma bay. And then Camille stood up. She didn't need the microphone this time. Her voice carries. 29 years of lecturing to auditoriums will do that. She looked directly at me. She adjusted her glasses. She placed both hands on the table in front of her like she was gripping a lectern. And she told 60 people that I wasn't a real doctor. She called my credentials fake. She called my education second-rate. She said I pretended to have qualifications I didn't earn. 3 tables heard every word. The people at my own table went still. Thomas looked at his plate. I pressed my thumb into my hip. I didn't stand. I didn't respond. Camille was still talking when Gregory Hayes, 68 years old, seated 7 feet to my left, dropped his fork, clutched his chest, and slid out of his chair onto the fellowship hall floor. The fork hit the linoleum first, a small metallic sound that cut through Camille's voice like a scalpel through gauze. Then the thud of Gregory Hayes' shoulder hitting the floor, and the ceramic crack of his dinner plate sliding off the table edge and breaking beside him. The room froze. I didn't. 21 years of training doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the room to catch up. It fires through your nervous system like a current, and your body is already moving before your conscious mind has finished processing what it saw. I was on my knees beside Gregory Hayes in 4 seconds. The hitch in my step vanished. It always does when the adrenaline hits. My nursing staff knows that. The pain was still there, somewhere deep in the joint, but it had been shoved into a back room and the door was locked. His eyes were open, fixed, unseeing. His lips were already going gray. I pressed 2 fingers to his carotid. Nothing. No pulse. No rise of his chest. No flutter under my fingertips. Just the particular stillness of a body whose electrical system has stopped sending signals. "Someone call 911, I said. Not loud, not panicked. The same volume I use at 3 in the morning in the trauma bay when a patient codes and I need the room to move without chaos. Tell them cardiac arrest. Male, approximately 68 years old. Fellowship Hall of Grace Lutheran, East Entrance." A woman at the next table grabbed her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. A man across the room stood up and then sat back down, unsure what to do with his body. "Does this church have an AED?" I said. I was already positioning Gregory flat on his back, tilting his head, clearing his airway. His tongue was slack, no obstruction. The pastor, a thin man named Reverend Alcott, who had been sitting 3 tables away, pointed toward the hallway. "Supply closet. Red case. On the wall. Get it. Bring it to me. Don't run. Walk fast." He went. I interlaced my fingers over Gregory's sternum. I found the compression point the way I've found it 1,000 times, 2 finger widths above the xiphoid process, heel of my hand centered. I locked my elbows. I began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm is specific. 100 to 120 compressions per minute, 2 inches deep, minimum. Full recoil between each one. You don't press gently. You press with the weight of your upper body driving straight down through locked arms. And if you're doing it right, you feel the sternum flex under your palms. Sometimes you feel ribs give way. That's not a complication. That's the cost of keeping blood moving through a heart that's forgotten how. 5, 6, 7, 8. The fellowship hall was silent except for the metronomic sound of my compressions and the faint wheeze of air being forced out of Gregory's lungs by the pressure on his chest. 60 people watched. Some had their hands over their mouths. Some had stood up. A few had moved closer, forming a loose semicircle that I was aware of only as shapes in my peripheral vision. I counted. I breathed on the offbeats. I kept my weight centered over his sternum, and I did not stop. What happens next is the reason I'm telling you this story. Thomas was standing 6 feet behind me. I didn't see him, but I heard him. The particular shuffle of his shoes, the sharp intake of breath he makes when he doesn't know what to do. He didn't speak. Camille was still seated at the head table. I registered her presence the way you register a piece of furniture. She was not relevant to what was happening on this floor. Gregory Hayes was relevant. His gray lips were relevant. The clock running in my head, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute, was relevant. Reverend Alcott returned with the AED red case, cardiac science brand. I recognized the model without looking at the label. We keep the same ones in the ambulance bays at the hospital. "Open it," I said. "Pull the pads out. They're in a sealed plastic pouch on the right side. Peel the backing off both pads. Don't touch the adhesive surface." He did. His hands were steadier than the woman with the phone. That helped. I paused compressions for 3 seconds. I tore Gregory's shirt open. The buttons scattered across the linoleum like dropped pills. I placed the pads. Right pad below the right clavicle. Left pad on the left side, below the armpit, along the cardiac axis. The green power light blinked on. The AED's automated voice filled the fellowship hall. Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient. I sat back on my heels. My hips screamed. The adrenaline was starting to thin, and the linoleum was the worst possible surface for a joint with no cartilage. I pressed my thumb into the joint. Hard. The pain sharpened and then steadied into something I could manage. Shock advised, the machine said. Stand clear. Everyone back, I said. Don't touch him. Don't touch anything metal that's touching him. I pressed the button. Gregory's body jolted, the particular involuntary arch of a man whose heart has just been restarted by 200 joules of electricity. The AED hummed and then went silent. I checked his pulse, faint, thready, present. It faded. Resuming compressions, I said to no one and to everyone. I locked my elbows again and went back to work. The sweat was running down my temples now. My hair had come loose from its clip and was hanging in my face. I blew it aside and kept counting. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. The compressions are exhausting. People don't understand that. Television shows a calm person pressing rhythmically, and then the patient coughs and wakes up. Reality is your shoulders burning, your lower back seizing, your hip grinding bone on bone, and the knowledge that if you slow down or lighten the pressure for even 5 seconds, the blood stops reaching his brain and you start losing him in a way you can't get back. 4 minutes. I delivered the second shock. This time, the jolt went through and stayed. I felt it under my fingers before the AED confirmed it. A pulse, faint but organizing, the particular irregular to regular transition of a heart remembering its rhythm. His chest rose, fell, rose again. Gregory Hayes was breathing. I stayed on my knees beside him. I kept 2 fingers on his carotid, monitoring the pulse, counting the rate. 54 beats per minute, slow but stable. His color was shifting, the gray receding from his lips, a faint flush returning to his cheeks. His eyelids fluttered. He didn't speak, but his right hand twitched, which told me his brain was getting oxygen. 7 minutes. That's how long I'd been on the floor. I didn't know that then. Someone told me later. The fellowship hall doors opened. No sirens in the hallway. No announcement. Just the quiet, deliberate footsteps of a man who has walked into 100 rooms where someone is on the floor and knows exactly what the next 60 seconds need to look like. Marcus Vance, lead paramedics, County EMS. I knew him before I saw him. The cadence of his boots, the particular metallic rattle of the jump bag over his shoulder, the faint smell of nitrile gloves and adhesive tape that follows every paramedic the way iodine follows a surgeon. He knelt beside me. He looked at the AED monitor. He looked at Gregory's chest rising and falling. He looked at my hands. Still on Gregory's carotid, still counting. Then he looked at my face. I saw the recognition register. Not surprise. Confirmation. The slight narrowing of his eyes, the single nod. He'd seen me in the trauma bay at the hospital more times than either of us could count. He'd transferred patients to me at 3 a.m. while I was barking orders in a room full of blood and adrenaline. He knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of. Sinus rhythm, he asked. 1 word, 2 words. That's all a paramedic needs to ask an emergency physician to confirm what they're both already reading on the monitor. It's not a question about the patient. It's a question about command. It means, are you running this, and are we stable? Sinus Brady, rate 54. Spontaneous respirations returned at minute 5, I said. 2 shocks delivered. V-fib to sinus, no epi. I didn't have any. He nodded once. I've got it from here, Dr. Trent. He said it clearly. He said it the way he says it in the ambulance bay. Professional, precise, and loud enough for the room to hear. Not because he was performing, because that's how transfers work. You name the physician. You confirm the handoff. It's protocol. But in that fellowship hall, with 60 people standing in silence and a woman at the head table who 40 seconds before the cardiac arrest had told every one of them that I was a fraud, in that room, the word doctor landed like a defibrillator shock of its own. Marcus unzipped his jump bag. His partner, a younger woman whose name I didn't catch, was already setting up the portable monitor. Marcus looked back at me as I shifted my weight off my knees. "How long on compressions?" 7 minutes. Solo." He paused. 7 minutes of continuous solo CPR is not routine. It is physically brutal. He looked at my arms, at the sweat darkening the front of my gray cardigan, at the way I was pressing my thumb into my hip as I tried to stand. "Outstanding," he said. "Quiet." One word. The way medical professionals speak to each other when there's nothing else to say, because the work has already said it. I stood. My hip buckled for half a second. I caught myself on the edge of the table. The hitch was back. Worse than before, a deep grinding ache that radiated from my joint down to my knee. The adrenaline was gone now, and my body was presenting the bill. Marcus turned to the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This man is alive because of the physician who was already performing CPR when we got the call. Whoever she is to the rest of you, in my trauma bay, she's Dr. Trent, and she just gave this man his life, back on a church floor with no team, no drugs, and no equipment besides a wall-mounted AED. He turned back to Gregory. His partner was already starting an IV line. The room was silent. I looked at Camille. She was still seated. Her reading glasses had slipped down her nose. The dinner roll was still in her hand. She hadn't moved it. She hadn't moved at all. Her mouth was slightly open, the way a mouth opens when the prepared paragraph dies in the throat and there's nothing behind it. I pressed my thumb into my hip. I held her gaze. "I practice emergency medicine, Camille." 5 words. I'd said them before, more than once, in that exact tone, with that exact patience. Every time, she'd waved her hand and adjusted her glasses and returned to whatever version of me she'd already written. She didn't wave her hand this time. I took one step toward her. Just one. "You told my children my degree wasn't real. You wrote a letter to my hospital designed to end my career. You stood in this room 10 minutes ago and told 60 people I was a fraud." I paused. The fluorescent light above the head table buzzed. A faint electric hum that filled the silence between us like a held breath. "I don't need you to believe I'm a doctor, Camille. The man breathing on that floor already knows." Camille's mouth closed, opened, closed again. Her hand, the one that waved dismissals like clearing smoke, was flat on the table, fingers pressed white against the cloth. Thomas was standing behind her chair. His face was the color of the linen tablecloth. He was looking at me the way you look at someone you've been married to for 14 years and realize you've never actually seen. I turned away from both of them. I walked back to Gregory Hayes. Marcus had him on a stretcher now. IV running, portable monitor showing a steady sinus rhythm at 62 beats per minute. Gregory's eyes were open, confused, frightened, but open. He saw me. His hand moved, just barely. His fingers opened and closed, reaching. I took his hand. His grip was weak. The grip of a man whose heart stopped 8 minutes ago, and whose brain is still catching up to the fact that it started again. I leaned down. "You're going to be fine, Mr. Hayes. You're going to the hospital. They'll take good care of you." He squeezed my hand once. Then Marcus and his partner wheeled him toward the east entrance, and the fellowship hall doors swung shut behind them, and I was standing alone in the center of a room that had gone so quiet I could hear the baseboard heaters clicking. I didn't look at Camille again. I didn't look at Thomas. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair, felt the weight of Robert's pocket Bible in the left pocket, and walked out of the fellowship hall. My hip was grinding with every step. The hitch was the worst it had been in years. A deep, rhythmic click that echoed off the tile hallway like a metronome, counting something I didn't want to measure. I pushed through the side door into the November air. It hit my face like cold water. My lungs filled, my hands were shaking, not from fear, not from adrenaline, from the simple, physical aftermath of 7 minutes of compressions delivered by a body that hasn't forgotten what it costs, but does the work anyway. I made it to my car. I sat down in the driver's seat. I closed the door, and then I pressed my thumb into my hip so hard that tears came to my eyes. Not from sadness, from the specific clarifying pain of a joint that was destroyed 21 years ago on a pitching ship deck while I saved a 19-year-old sailor's life. And that has never once stopped me from doing my job. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock read 6:47 when I sat down and 6:58 when I finally reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Robert's Bible. What happened next came to me in pieces. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't need to. Small towns have their own circulatory system, and information moves through it the way blood moves through capillaries, quietly, steadily, reaching places you didn't expect. The first piece came from my colleague, Dr. Linda Hargrove, 3 days after Thanksgiving. She's the chief medical officer, the same woman who had forwarded Camille's credentialing letter to me 6 months earlier. She called me into her office, closed the door, and set a single sheet of paper on her desk. The credentialing committee dismissed the complaint formally, she said. Unanimous. They also referred the matter to the hospital's legal department. I looked at the paper. I didn't pick it up. Referred for what? Tortious interference. Camille's letter alleged professional misconduct without basis and was designed to influence your employment status. The hospital's position is that it constitutes defamation per se under state law, a false statement imputing unfitness in a profession. Linda paused. Legal sent a demand letter to your mother-in-law yesterday. It identifies $40,000 in potential damages, reputational harm, administrative costs of the investigation, and lost productivity during the review period. They're offering to settle for a written retraction and $15,000. $40,000. $15,000 to settle for a letter written on linen stationery by a retired literature professor who thought she could end a medical career with a paragraph. I didn't ask Linda how she felt about it. Her face told me. She'd spent 4 months investigating a baseless complaint because protocol required it, and every hour of that investigation was an hour she didn't spend on actual credentialing work. She was angry in the quiet, professional way that hospital administrators get angry, the anger that becomes paperwork with legal letterhead. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Let legal handle it." The second piece came a week later from Thomas. He called me at the hospital during my lunch break, a break I was spending standing at my desk because sitting made my hip worse after the Thanksgiving compressions. He sounded different, not the careful measuring voice he uses when he's managing his mother, something rawer. "I talked to her," he said. "When?" "That night, after you left, and again yesterday." He told me what happened the night of Thanksgiving. After I'd walked out of the fellowship hall, after the paramedics had taken Gregory, Camille sat at the head table for 20 minutes. The room emptied around her. People collected their coats and their casserole dishes and left without saying goodbye. Reverend Alcott asked if she needed anything. She said no. Thomas sat across from her and waited. When the hall was empty, he told his mother that she had humiliated his wife in public, lied to his children, and attempted to sabotage a medical career that had saved a man's life on the floor in front of her. He told her that the hospital was pursuing legal action. He told her that if she contacted the credentialing committee, his children, or me again, without invitation, he would support whatever legal boundary I chose to set. Thomas had never said any of those things to his mother before, not in 46 years. She cried, he said, not with sympathy, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent his entire adult life avoiding a conversation he should have had a decade ago. I pressed my thumb into my hip. "Why didn't you warn me about the letter, Thomas?" Silence. Long enough that I heard the hospital intercom paging a respiratory therapist to the 4th floor. Because I thought if I ignored it, she'd stop. She didn't stop. She escalated. I know. You know now. You knew then too. More silence. "I'm sorry, Sybil. I should have stood in front of you. I stood behind her instead." He wasn't wrong. And he wasn't entirely right either. Thomas hadn't stood behind Camille. He'd stood nowhere. He'd made himself small and quiet and absence has a shape, and its shape is the exact outline of the person who should have been there. "I need time," I said. "How much?" "I don't know yet." He accepted that. He didn't push. For the first time in 14 years, his silence felt like something other than cowardice. It felt like the beginning of someone learning to wait without managing. The third piece came through the church. Reverend Alcott called me personally to say that Camille had been removed from the Thanksgiving dinner organizing committee. Not fired. The church is too polite for that word. Transitioned to an advisory role, he said, which meant her name would stay on the letterhead and her seat at the head table would not. 3 families had called the church office the week after Thanksgiving to express concern. One of them was the Hayes family. Gregory's daughter had written a letter of her own, not to a credentialing committee, but to the congregation newsletter, thanking the woman who saved her father's life on the fellowship hall floor. She named me. She used the word doctor. The 4th piece arrived by mail. A plain white envelope with Camille's return address. No linen stationery this time. I opened it at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. Inside was a single handwritten note. The handwriting was smaller than usual, less controlled. "I was wrong about you. I have been wrong for a long time. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I owe you the truth. I was afraid of what you were, not what you weren't." I read it twice. I set it on the table. I pressed my thumb into my hip and felt the ache radiate down through my knee to the floor. She was afraid of what I was, a woman who had earned everything Camille believed could only be bestowed by the right institution, the right name, the right pedigree, a woman who had performed surgery on a pitching ship and passed boards on no sleep and cracked a man's chest on a church floor with no team and no hesitation. Not because I was exceptional, because I was trained, and I showed up, and I did not stop. Camille had spent 11 years trying to make me smaller because my existence disproved everything she believed about how merit works. That's not an excuse, but it is an explanation, and explanations are worth holding, even when they don't fix anything. I didn't write back. Not that week. Not the next. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Thomas brought the kids to the house. We sat at the kitchen table, the 4 of us. No Camille, no performance, no audience. My daughter asked me if I was okay. She's 12. She asks questions like a person who already knows the answer but wants you to say it out loud. "I'm okay," I said. "Grandma sent you a letter." "She did." "Are you going to write back?" I looked at my daughter. She has Thomas's eyes and my stubbornness and Robert's quiet way of waiting for an answer without filling the silence. "Sometime," I said. "Not today." She nodded. That was enough. Thomas walked me to the porch when they left. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the driveway, not at me. "I'm seeing a counselor," he said. "A therapist. Someone Linda recommended. I didn't respond right away. The November wind was sharp against my face. My hip ached. Good, I said. One word. I meant it. He nodded once and walked to his car. I watched him pull out of the driveway. I didn't wave, but I didn't go inside until his taillights disappeared around the corner. That night, I drove back to Grace Lutheran. The parking lot was empty. The building was dark except for the small amber light above the east entrance, the same door the paramedics had wheeled Gregory Hayes through 3 weeks earlier. I parked in the same spot I'd parked on Thanksgiving. I turned off the engine. The silence was enormous. Not empty, full. The kind of silence that holds everything that's happened inside it without needing to name any of it. I reached into my coat pocket. Robert's Bible. The leather was soft from years of his hands turning the same pages. I opened it to the front cover. His handwriting. Careful, slanted, the penmanship of a man who grew up writing letters by hand and never stopped. You fix bodies. God fixes the rest. Between the two of you, we'll be fine. I read it once. I pressed my thumb against the page, feeling the slight indent where his pen had pressed hard on the word fine. He'd meant it. Robert had always meant exactly what he said. No lectures, no thesis statements, no paragraphs with a conclusion you weren't allowed to interrupt. Just the truth, written down and left for the person who needed it. I closed the Bible. I held it in my lap. The parking lot was quiet. The amber light above the east entrance hummed faintly, the way hospital lights hum at 3 a.m. when the trauma bay is finally empty and the shift is almost over and your body starts remembering all the things you told it to ignore. My hip ached, the deep grinding ache that lives in the joint where the cartilage used to be. The cartilage I traded for a sailor's life on a ship deck 21 years ago. The hitch would be there when I walked back into the hospital tomorrow morning. My nursing staff would read it like a clock. They'd know I'd had a long week. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. The clock read 8:14 p.m. I drove home with the Bible on the passenger seat and the hitch in my step a little more pronounced than usual, the way it always is when the cold gets into the joint and the day has asked more of me than I planned to give. The road was dark. The headlights caught bare branches overhead, reaching across the road like hands that couldn't quite touch. I am a doctor. I was a doctor before Camille's approval, and I will be a doctor long after her objections have faded into the particular silence that follows a person who has run out of things to say. The man on the fellowship hall floor knows. The paramedic who knelt beside me knows. My daughter knows. Some credentials hang on a wall. Others show up on a church floor at Thanksgiving and keep a man's heart beating for 7 minutes with nothing but locked elbows and a body that remembers what it was trained to do. I know which kind matters. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever carried credentials that someone decided weren't enough because they didn't come from the right place or the right name, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you carried and who tried to take it from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. Hit the like button, tap the bell. I have more stories to tell, and I think you're the right person to hear them.